Hey everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to a book I wrote. It's called Follow. It's a book about spirituality that looks at it in a holistic way, from a psychological as well as an earthly aspect of a human being. My channel is dedicated to giving you some prior knowledge about each chapter. A lot of the topics I explore are, you would call very unorthodox. It's not information that you would hear, on TV or at church or at work or, at the nail salon or what have you. Some people consider it to be a cult. I don't consider it to be a cult. I don't like the word occult, that is, because, when people think of a cult, they think of evil. but it's just not mainstream knowledge, if you will. And the topics I explore are very, sensitive, such as sex. I talk a lot about sex. I talk a lot about religion. I talk a lot about money and things like that. So, those are things that people typically want to kind of stay away from, and they don't want to talk about. And so this book definitely, provides a lot of opportunity for spiritual discourse and discussing these very sensitive topics, if you will. And I focus on the different constructs of the matrix that, such as religion, education, media and entertainment, the government itself, our familial structures, and how those aspects of society actually create the false ego. And so when we think of the ego is just a false self. When we descend into earth reality, into a mind, into a body, we incarnate, we're just playing a part. We're just playing an avatar. And that's why so many people associate themselves with their zodiac sign, because depending upon your zodiac, you get, it determines what your race is, it determines what your nationality, it determines your religion and that type of thing. And so it definitely is like a cookie cutter type of cog system, if you will, that you're put into when you incarnate. And so, I just pretty much expose those things so we can wake up from our dream, so to speak, and actually awaken to what, reality is, and live in more peace and more integrity. The last chapter that I talked about, typically I like to talk about and just give it a preview, or, just to kind of recap what happened in the last chapter. So the last chapter is called Gedanken Kontrolle. And so that's a German word for mind control. And I talked about, mind control, and how there are, the ego is always governed by the environment, if you will. And our environment, our matrix environment, is controlled in another dimension. People call it like the fourth dimension or the astral plane or what have you. But the true, creators of our society, people call them God or the gods or what have you, they control it from another dimension, so to speak, or people call it a dimension. And so I try to really, talk about in the last video how, mind control, to quantify how mind control is utilized within our physical reality. To not make it sound as far-fetched or, a Harry Potter-ish, if you will, because, in discussing some of the different various mind control tactics that the elite use to govern the ego, they just sound ain't crazy, they do. But if you have an open third eye, and if you are able to have some insight, you really see that, mind control is very real, and that, people are targeted, especially based upon their level of development, especially if you have melanin. The more melanin you have, the more you're targeted within our false society, because melanin, is produced by the third eye. And so the third eye, allows you to see past the superficial and gives you insight. And so using the various constructs of the matrix, they actually debase the third eye. So, and by infusing you with Satanism, having you focusing on things instead of the metaphysics of which makes things. So they have you focus on the physical, not on the divinity that creates the divine. So they make you focus on the divine itself, but not the divinity that created it. In order to, make you just see life in a very external way, not internally, but externally. So, this chapter is called Kylo Ren. It's called Kylo Ren, and people know Kylo Ren from the movie series Star Wars, if you will. And so, when we look at the various constructs of the Matrix, especially media and entertainment, the Freemason, creators definitely embed a lot of information into media and entertainment. And, when I started to wake up and my third eye opened, I really started to see, um, the occult meanings behind things, or the insightful meaning behind movies and songs and things like that. The Bible, the metaphysics of the Bible, and how our government is structured. So all the constructs of the Matrix, I start to decode the Matrix, so to speak, using this pineal gland, using knowledge, true knowledge, not knowledge, external knowledge, but internal knowledge. And so Star Wars is definitely a film that offers a lot of just occult knowledge about our reality. And Kylo Ren, we see Kylo Ren in the movie The Last Jedi. And Kylo Ren is a character. He very dark and menacing character. He works with the dark side, and he's working with the dark side to stomp out all light within the universe. He tries to kill his mother, Princess Leia, and he didn't come from the dark side. He's the son of Princess Leia and Han Solo, I believe. And so, but he works with the dark side to destroy light within the universe. And so that actually encompasses destroying Rey or Rhea. I pronounce it Rhea, but maybe they pronounce it Rey, in the movie. But Rhea or Rey is the last Jedi. She's the last little bit of light, if you will, within the universe. And so, and giving you a little rundown about the movie, if you will, this movie is all about consciousness. This movie is all about consciousness. Superficially, it's about like aliens and all that type of stuff, and the Galactic Confederation, whatever the case is. But really, this is about consciousness, awareness. And, Kylo Ren actually represents the id. He represents the inner child. Whereas Rhea represents the ego. And so Kylo Ren is the id, or the inner child of Rhea. And the inner child, or ego, in Freudian psychology, the id is a conglomeration of unmanifested desires and tendencies. You can think of the id as like the only thing that when a child is born, the only thing that's born into the world. So, for example, when we're in physical reality, we are very much suppressed and restricted, and so this creates an unconscious, which is the id. So, like, for example, if you are born into a situation where you have a desire to to play music. Say you have a desire to be a musician, but you can't be a musician because you have to, your family wants you to work in a business to create shoes, if you will. So your family's like, we want you to work in this business to do this, but there's a burning desire in you to want to play music and play the guitar, and say you've seen, you've been inspired by different stars on television, and when you were in school, you played the guitar and you really liked your teacher who taught you the guitar. And so there are things in your life that produce this desire, but you weren't able to ground it. You didn't have the sacral aspect, the earthly sacral aspect of yourself to ground that desire. If you don't ground that desire within physicality before you give up the mind and body, or before you die, whatever you want to call it, it's actually just put into your unconscious mind, and this is the id. This is the id. And so, when that's, put into your mind, you have to, you get reincarnated into another lifetime to work out that, that demonic, I guess as you would call, archon energy. That's the demon, because it's something that wants to find expression through you, but it can't find expression through you because it doesn't have the ownership of the earthly sacral to do that. So, this is pretty much who Kylo Ren is. And Kylo Ren is Rhea's id. And so Rhea, if you look at the word Rhea, the name Rhea, Rhea actually corresponds to a moon of Saturn. And so you could think of, what is it, I guess Rhea is Isis, really in a way she's in a occult, metaphysical way, she represents Isis. And the id is Satan, if you will. The id is Satan. Or El. If you look at Israel, El is Satan or Saturn. It's the ancient Hebrew name for Satan or Saturn. So she's Isis, which is the moon, which is the right brain. And I can't remember, but the little stormtrooper, I can't remember his name, but he would be Ra. He would be her masculine counterpart. I can't remember his name. But he's the stormtrooper that is tied to Rhea, if you will, the ex-stormtrooper, if you will. And so, that really represents consciousness. And so, I really talk about my own Kylo Ren here. Because, I've been reincarnated. This is what I'm playing Sagittarius right now. And so there are 11 other lifetimes, including this one where my earthly sacral has been suppressed. And so, my earthly sacral is now very filthy and debased and disgusting. I didn't really realize how disgusting it was until I got illuminated and I started to really do some introspection and just to see all the filthiness and nastiness that was housed in my unconscious mind. I don't really want to talk about a whole lot of it here. It's in the book, but you'll get more explicit examples, if you will, about the nasty filthiness or what have you that's been lodged in my unconscious, who I am on the astral realm, if you will. I guess you could say I'm the Grinch. It's around holiday time, whatever. So, I'm the Grinch in the other world, so to speak. But, it's because of the suppression within the physical that has birthed Kylo Ren. And so when I think of Kylo Ren, I think of my consciousness, because there's only but so much consciousness left within me before my whole universe becomes dominated by darkness or by Maya or dream or what have you. When I think about my consciousness, I think about the Titanic and how, there was a big glacier, if you will, an iceberg. And so most of the iceberg is under the water. So most of it I'm not aware of, but there's only a small portion above the water. That's my awareness. And so, with another lifetime, if I don't find union with my masculine counterpart, then I'll be totally dominated by the unconscious mind, and my universe will just be dominated by dream. So this is what Kylo Ren is competing for between Rhea, Isis, and Kylo Ren, which is the id, if you will, or the Antichrist. So Isis is not Isis, but Rhea is Christ, whereas Kylo Ren is the Antichrist. And so they're competing for the throne. They're competing for Rhea's consciousness, who will dominate the consciousness, if you will. And so there's an opportunity for Kylo Ren to be what you would call, Darth Vader. Yeah. So he's trying to be the new Darth Vader, if you will, because if Rey's light, since she's the last Jedi, if her light is taken, if you will, he will dominate the universe as a Darth Vader with no light. And so the one thing about I want to bring up here is that, awareness is important. Awareness, the pineal gland, the third eye, gives balance to the universe. It gives some balance. And if you don't have balance, you will degenerate into filth and disgustingness. And what do I mean by that? We incarnate, our mind is wiped, if you will. All the knowledge that we gained in our previous incarnation is taken away from us. But if you were to be born into this reality with some type of knowledge, you would live with more integrity, which would allow you to have balance. Because you wouldn't really deny yourself so much. You would know that life is not just about giving or taking. It's about a combination of the two. And so when it's time to give up the mind and body, you would give it up at will instead of having to be forced out of it like human beings typically are. When we die, we don't really get a say. You know, we just have to leave. We're told to leave, and so we go. But when you are in a state of balance, if you will, you just give it up because you know you're like, well, there's nothing else I really want to do here. You know what I mean? You know, if I want to sing and play the guitar, I'll sing and play the guitar, and it's like, okay, you know, I'll give somebody else a try at this avatar if that's what they want. But because we're not able to, you know, descend in a state of balance, if you will, and we're not able to ground any of our desires, then it forces us to want to incarnate again to work those things out. And so Rhea is actually you know, Rhea is the ego, and Kylo is really trying to take her light so he can take off his mask. There's a whole big thing about taking his mask off, and so the id always tries to you know, find realization for its dark desires by hiding from the ego, and wearing a mask. And, you know, he doesn't want any light within the universe, so he can take off his mask and be the nasty, disgusting, and filthy, you know, person that he is. You know, he doesn't want Rhea to see what he really is. And that's why Rhea really lives in poverty. You know, she's in poverty because you know, she is the Christ, you know, or Lucifer, as what you would call. You know, I know people are like, Lucifer is bad or what have you. You know, I don't really want people to look at Lucifer in the connotation that that has been given to us in Christian theology. Lucifer just means light bearer. She just has light and she has knowledge. And so, you know, but she has a spiritual knowledge. She's a psychological, like me, I'm a psychological you know, aspect of the soul, whereas Kylo is a very debased and disgusting, exacerbated, I guess what you would call earthly, now in a hellish state. And so he's like the earthly sacral, like the Muladhara. And so even if you look at their lightsaber colors, they represent the different aspects of the soul. So Rhea has a blue lightsaber because she represents the truth. You know, she represents you know, the blue. I think blue is associated with the upper chakras, or one of the upper chakras, either the pineal or the throat chakra. Whereas you know, Kylo excuse me, Kylo represents the lower chakras, or the earthly chakra, which is the Muladhara, I believe is symbolized by red. So that's why red, the earth, basically, this is a human being that's fighting against itself. The earth is fighting against the psychological, the knowledge. And so he wants to destroy the knowledge so he can have his earthly conquest. And, you know, the purpose is not to do that. The purpose when you descend into earth reality is to descend with balance, so you marry the earthly. The earthly should marry the psychological. You know, the angel should be able to see itself in its reflection, so to speak. But there's so many things put in place to make sure that an angel disintegrates and not see, and the angel doesn't see itself in other people, and to create such a separation to prevent that from happening. And so instead of fighting Rhea, if you will, they should be in union with one another to dissipate that archonic energy that rules her ego, if you will. So that's where the other, I feel bad, I can't remember the name of the the guy, the little stormtrooper, but he you know, he represents a healthy masculine counterpart to Rhea, as opposed to Kylo. Kylo is just the L, or the Satan that separates the right and the left part of the brain or the mind. So, you know, and I just talk about in this sense how, you know, I'm due to actually reincarnate again, and how, you know, in reincarnation, every time you reincarnate, your melanin gets extracted out of you. And so when your melanin gets extracted out of you, you have less insight, you know, less of a third eye. You start to tip in the other direction, where you become more of a reptile, if you will. And so, you know, when it comes to the you know, when it comes to that, you know, this part of me sold me out on the astral realm for stuff. So you can consider my Kylo Ren to be Judas. If you think about Judas Iscariot in the Bible and how Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. And so, really, Judas, Jesus is Judas. I know it's going to sound weird. If you're reading the Bible from a superficial level, you will see that, they appear as two different people. But in a metaphysical standpoint, Jesus is Judas. He sold himself out in another realm. And I know that might be hard for people to really understand. But, like for example, we know Jesus is not just existing in a physical body. He exists in another realm. That's why he says to people, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so the Father's not walking around. The Father's in heaven. And so he's telling you, I am the Father. I'm this ego, but also I'm an etheric being somewhere else. And so this is where the Trinity comes in. And the Trinity is a separation of mind. The Trinity is, Christ is supposed to integrate the right and the left brain. But because there's Satan, which is the devolvement of the material corresponding to the third eye, and the debasement of the third eye, it separates Isis and Ra, Israel. And so, and that's why when we think of Israel, we think of the Jews. And typically we think of Jews, we think of like Nazi Germany, and, we think of, people who are more so kind of like of Middle Eastern descent, if you will. But the original Jews are super duper melanated black people. And so the more melanin you have, the closer you are to your Jewish heritage. I wanted to kind of put that out there because typically that's not what we see, if you will, when we, when we're told about Judaism and Jewish people. But they embedded in various little constructs of the Matrix, like this new song with Beyonce and her husband Jay-Z. That's a dead giveaway that the Jews are actually super duper melanated people. That's the closest that you will find to your Jewish heritage, when they have the spectrum of different black people, the spectrum of hues of black people in the video, dancing in front of the Pope. I think it's Napoleon. It's a picture of the Pope and Napoleon about to crown his wife, the Empress, if you will, in front of him. And, they're Israel. She and her husband represent Israel. And so, especially when they're standing in front of the Mona Lisa, because the Mona Lisa represents Saturn or Satan. I know that's like, what? That's crazy. But if you think about it, Leonardo da Vinci, the one who, who created the Mona Lisa, he had his lover, I think it's his lover, but it's a man that's named Salias, and Salias stands for the devil or the unclean one. And so when you see Beyonce and her husband standing in front of the Mona Lisa, they're telling you this is Israel. Isis, Ra, and then El in the middle, separating them, in between them. So, when it comes to the occult understanding of Israel and Judaism, the so-called, Jews, this is what it corresponds to, and it corresponds a lot to melanin. And so, in this chapter, I really talk about, my own Kylo Ren and how I'm supposed to be reincarnated. And that's why I've definitely fought through hell. I've definitely fought through hell to get this book out the way, because eventually my universe will be dominated by Dream or Maya. And so my next avatar will be totally dumb and stupid and won't be able to recognize this reality for what it is. And so I really tried to beat the clock, you know what I mean, so to speak, in a way, trying to, before I bleed out, if you will, trying to get this message out there for my future avatar. And, there have been so many times, during my journey that I felt like I was leaving my body. Like I said, there's been so many different, in the last chapter, there have been so many different mind torture tactics that have been forcing me, pushing me into my intellectual mind, to the point where pushing me out of the body. That's what mind torture does. And, I would do, little things. I would try to exercise and eat a lot. You know, eating definitely puts you, you know, down to earth. And, you know, I've gained some weight just to try to stay in the body and pack the body, trying to pack myself so I can, you know, stay in physicality. And once my book is, you know, finished, I definitely will start to unpack, because really I can't hold on to the body anymore. You know, it's very interesting. I know that sounds weird. It's like, oh, what is she talking about? Like she's about to die. I don't really call it death, if you will. But, you know, when you've reached a certain level of knowledge, if you will, it's hard to hold on to the body. You know, your light body, you know, you break out of physicality, if you will. And so, you know, I can't really hold on to the body for very much longer with the type of knowledge that I have. You know, interacting with people in a very energetic way is torture. It literally is torture, because I don't really see people superficially anymore. I see the energy behind their mask, and the fact that, you know, in a way, it's kind of like seeing devils in a way. I mean, like when you look at that movie, the Exorcism of Emily Rose, you know, she would see grimaces, and so that drove her like crazy, like drove her insane. And so I don't see grimaces per se, but I do feel the energies behind people's masks, and because of that, you know, it's definitely difficult for me to reconcile the superficial everyday, this is what I want to show you, to what I really know what's behind it. So being like me walking around is not very well received. And you know, people innately feel aggression, if you will, sometimes towards me too, because their ego is at stake. You know, it's like I can't really be fake around you. So it's like, get out of here. You know, it's like, you know, I really don't want you around. You're a Martian. And in a way, I am a Martian. You know, I'm not of this world. I've actually risen above the world. And because I'm above the world, you know, at this point, and being, and having such a psychic ability, super duper psychic, super duper, you know, have access to the Akashic record, have access to the Book of Life. You know, it's illusions can't necessarily exist with me walking around. And so, you know, with that, you know, and being pushed and forced out of the body, I had to just really try to hurry up and get the book out, because I know that I'm due to be reincarnated out again. And so, you know, like they say, you know, the heaven and hell will pass away. This ego and this astral aspect of myself will pass away, but, you know, the word will never pass away. And so I'm all about getting the word out there. And that's what, you know, I suppose I contracted to, what I contracted to do, you know, to get the word out there, and to bring in this other aspect of me that is not aware, if you will. And I brought up Emily Rose, and I'm happy kind of, you know, that was just something off the cuff. I didn't expect to bring up Emily Rose, if you will. If you're not familiar, The Exorcism of Emily Rose was a movie, like a horror movie that came out years ago, maybe over a decade ago. And, you know, in that movie, it, you know, it talks about a girl who was possessed, and she had an exorcism, but her exorcism failed, and she ended up dying. I think the priest and all the people who were in on the exorcism, they got convicted. And you know, one thing about I want to point out is that people aren't ever possessed by demons the way that we think they are. You know, superficially we think demons are, you know, like dead people or something like that that come in and they inhabit your vessel. In a way, it's not like that per se. You know, a demon is just some archon energy that hasn't found expression through your ego and physicality. It becomes a demon. Like I said, if you want to play music and you can't play music, you can't be that pop star you want to be, that's a demon. And you keep incarnating until you actually fulfill that within your ego, within your physical body. But the thing is that because of the separation in the mind, we can't really ground our desires the way that we want to. And so the Exorcism of Emily Rose is a very, is an excellent example of what that looks like, because I think she was someone who suffered from epileptic seizures. And so when you suffer from epileptic seizures, they sometimes do a procedure that separates your left and your right brain. There's a separation there. And, when there's a separation, if you will, you start to accrue phantoms, and these are demons. That's, to me, that's the reason why her exorcism didn't really work. And, she was just overtaken by a legion, if you will, of demonic forces. There's something called alien hand syndrome. And, because in doing research, what have you, and waking up, I really tried to figure out, what was my condition? Like, what was going on with me? There were so many different supernatural occurrences happening that I really just couldn't understand it. And so when you look at separation of the left and right mind, such as, when you have epilepsy, you have that procedure that separates the left and right. Or like when you have alien hand syndrome. People who have alien hand syndrome, they don't have the right connection to the left and right mind. So their right hand, like they will consciously tell their right hand to do something. Like they may tell their, right hand to grab their cell phone or something like that. But the left hand will try to grab it, or it will do something crazy, like it'll slap them in the face or something, or it'll try to grab the phone or something like that. So the thing is that there's no connection, there's no conscious connection with the left hand, and so the left hand just acts erratic. It does like crazy stuff, if you will. And that goes to show the alien hand syndrome. It goes to show that when you don't have connection between your right and your left brain, there are alien aspects of you that you meet at the end of your incarnation. And you're like, wow, I didn't really know that about myself. It's because you don't have a connection to this other aspect of you. It's like a split personality or a dissociative personality. It's a part of you just don't know. And so this is your astral self. So when it talks about in the book of Genesis how God separated Adam and Eve, he separated matter from spirit. And when you separate matter from spirit, you create the ego and the astral self that you go to when you go to sleep at night, and you shed all of your various, concepts of the matrix, black, white, rich, poor, whatever it is. You separate those aspects of yourself. You don't live in integrity. You don't live in balance. And you just meet a part of yourself that's, that's horrible. And you don't really understand how you even got that way. Just like with me and waking up and looking at my dissociative personalities and, how I don't like black women and black people, and I'm black. In another dimension, I thought that was insane. I thought that was crazy. I was like, what do you mean? I'm black. But yeah, I really hate black people, and I hate black women in the astral realm. And, looking at all of my programming and, the interactions I had with my mother and how black women were portrayed on television, and my consciousness really soaked up a lot of, derogatory things made towards black women. And so we don't control what goes into the mind. And in my book, when I talk about brain frequencies, I talk about how, our minds are not our own. If I took something and I flashed it in front of you, if I took, say for example, if I took my cell phone, and I flashed it in front of you, that's kind of a blur. You can't really see that very well. But if I took something and I just flashed it, and you may say to yourself, well, I didn't see that. Well, if you were put into a state of deep, meditation or hypnosis, you would be able to recall every single detail. And so if, I flash something in front of you and take it away, I'm God, actually, at that point. I'm God, because I now know something about you that you don't know. I've exposed you to information that you cannot readily recall unless you're in a deep state of hypnosis. And you don't have the ability to retrieve that information. So I know what's there, but you don't know what's there. And so that's how we function as human beings in hell. That's why we say hello. This is hell. Someone owns your mind. And so they get a chance to determine who you are in this world and in the other one. They get a chance to determine, what you're exposed to, and you become everything that you see. And this is really difficult. This is hard to come to grips with when you meet the alien aspect of yourself. And and going back to Emily Rose, her name wasn't really Emily Rose. The movie is called The Exorcism of Emily Rose, but the person it was based upon, her name is Annalise Michel. And, if you look at her upbringing, Annalise Michel was very much a devout Catholic, very stripped and suppressed of the earthly sacral. So, in the Catholic Church, saints are looked at as very pious, but a saint is a disgusting, filthy whore. I know, right? You say to yourself, how could you say something like that? You mean Saint Teresa? Yes. Saints are disgusting and filthy because, I don't know. I'm not saying Saint Teresa. Maybe Saint Teresa was wonderful. I don't really know a whole lot about that saint. Maybe she embraced her earthly aspect of herself as well, and she had that perfect balance of giving and taking. But, when you're a saint, you typically are a giver. You sacrifice yourself for other people. And so when you're suppressing the earthly, you are becoming disgusting in the astral. So like, for example, I heard of a spiritual teacher say one time, he's 85% spiritual. Well, that means that he's 85% carnal and earthly, or hellish, if you will, in the astral realm. This whole realm is about balance. This is not about, I'm going to give to the world and love everyone and, and kiss babies and that type of thing. Sorry, that's just not what this world is about. Really the world, I know I've said in other videos that, this world is, not about pleasure, but really it's supposed to be. It's not about pleasure. The creators of our reality made it for toil, to create slaves, if you will. But really, it is supposed to be in its essence. It is supposed to be about experience, about pleasure. It's not supposed to be about saving the world. This is not supposed, and it's also not supposed to be just reaping and taking from the world. It's supposed to be where you get to experience yourself in a very lighthearted, profound way. It's like a playroom, if you will. But, we have been taught and groomed and conditioned to believe this is real, to feed the parasites that created it, because they need the negative emotions and they need you to really identify with your role and experience suffering so they could feel better. So something that was intended for good, was actually used and misconstrued, if you will. That's why when it talks about the Lord that came to Babylon and saw the people building the city, he confounded their speech. He created America, basically. This is Babylon. This is the updated Babylon. This is just a new version of the old scene. And so, he made sure through the reincarnation system, pressing out the melanin, creating all the various races and cultures, religions, and so forth. This confounded the speech of the people, because the people of Babylon were building a tower to heaven. What does that mean? Superficially, it's like, oh, they were creating the pyramids, so that's a superficial. But no, the pyramids represent syncing the astral with the earthly physical self. And so the thing is that they were trying to get out of slavery, basically. They were trying to, connect the heaven to earth. And so, this connection would have taken them out of slavery, out of physicality in a way, or being a slave to physicality. And so the Lord was like, no, we're going to actually disintegrate their language. And these are the original Jews. When the Lord came into Babylon and disintegrated their language and started extracting the melanin and created the reincarnation system, whatever you would call it, the Hall of Amenti, whatever they talk about in the Emerald Tablets. Whenever that artificial system was created to prevent people from having unlimited power, if you will, and so this is the Lord of of Babylon that comes to confound the speech of the Jews. These are your real Jews. That's why you see anti-Semitism in Egypt or whatever before the Greeks and the Romans or whatever came to, invade. They shot off the noses of the statues. These are, melanated people, black people. And so they did not want that knowledge to be tied to the Jews, if you will. And so that had to be done away with, if you will. They had to actually destroy the knowledge and desecrate the knowledge to make a false matrix environment to enslave the people there. So it's all about slavery. Where if you're a human being, you're a slave. It's all about the slave system, if you will. But whenever you are, separating a human being and suppressing the earthly aspect, like I talked about how Emily Rose was a devout, and how saints are devout and they deny their earthly aspect of themselves. You have you create what we call an astral self. You have a psychological split between Adam and Eve, Isis and Ra, whatever you want to call it, the sun, the moon, whatever. That's why the moon comes out at night, because when you go to sleep at night, you go to the moon. The moon is your unconscious self, the self that you're not, totally aware of. And, you really just act out the restrictions that you have in physicality. That's why they say we can't really get past the moon, so to speak. This is hell. We keep going back from our ego to the moon, to the unconscious. Ego, unconscious. Ego, unconscious. Moon, sun, moon, sun, moon, sun. There's other aspects of the universe besides the moon and sun. And so, but within this slave system, we're definitely made to, just stay here and work ourselves to death until we die. And that's what the intention is of the elite that create this false reality. And, in this particular chapter, I really bring up Judas, the Gospel of the Gnostic text, which is the Gospel of Judas. And, just kind of painting a picture of the astral self. When Jesus is talking to his disciples, his disciples are really avatars. His disciples are avatars from various, if you read it superficially, it's not going to sound like this. But if you read this text from a more insightful third eye, pineal gland, when you're using your pineal gland, it shows you that Jesus is Judas, and Judas represents an avatar of Jesus. And so, out of all of the disciples, Judas is closest to Jesus. And that's for a reason. You can think of Judas as like a twin. In fact, in the Gospel of Judas, he's referred to as the 13th demon or daemon. And so the 13th just represents the sun, if you will, or the Pope or the High Priest, if you will. It represents everything coming to its totality, if you will. When you're playing the various avatars of the zodiac, like I'm in Sagittarius, so now I get to face Judas. Judas is my twin flame. And I've talked a little bit about my twin flame in this in this book and in this in my various videos, if you will. But he's my twin because I'm totally spiritual, etheric, or psychological, but he's totally carnal and physical and all about gratification, that type of thing. So there's definitely a polarized split between my right and my left brain. So I get to face off with Judas. And so, that's pretty much come full circle, if you will. But, in the Gospel of Judas, it talks of, Jesus is talking to his disciples, because the disciples are being super duper pious. I think they're like giving thanks about a dinner or something like that. Something's going on where they're, giving thanks to God, and they're giving offerings and things like that. And, Jesus is like, what are you doing? And, Jesus kind of scoffs and laughs at them in the gospel. And they're like, why are you laughing at us, Master? We've done what's proper. We're doing the right thing. And, Jesus is like, this is not what you want to do. This is to give your God glory. And so he's really kind of scoffing at them because he's looking at them. They're not living in integrity. They're just doing something because someone told them to do it, because they feel it's right. Whenever you're doing something in this world because it's right, it will have dire consequences, because we shouldn't live in terms of right and wrong. Essentially, when you're living in balance, you should live with your feelings. What you feel is right. Do what you feel is right. And so sometimes what you feel is right is not what society considers to be right. And so whenever you're building up your unconscious, and your unconscious gets super duper angry and mad, you start to become a devil. And in the astral realm, when you actually release your restrictions, you start to act in a very, debased and filthy way. So there's an excerpt, if you will, that I took out of the Gospel of Judas, to give you just an interpretation of what your astral self looks like. Because Jesus's disciples, when he's talking to them, they don't even know they have an astral self. They talk to him about a dream that they had, and they say, there's some people outside of a house and they're trying to get into this house or something, and they talk about how there's priests around an altar, and they all exalt the name of Jesus. And so, he comes to tell them, you're the priest that's exalting my name. He says, but, there's another aspect to you, basically, that you don't know. And because these priests are very evil, although they're saying, love Jesus, I guess, whatever, they're exalting his name and saying, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, whatever the case is, they are evil. And he exposes them in the Gospel of Judas. It says, and also too with the Gospel of Judas, there's a lot of holes, if you will, in the text. I guess, when it was found, it was very much just broken apart. So there's, as I read it, it's going to be a whole lot of different places or whatever where it's there's ellipses, if you will. There's parts that are taken out of it. But it says that, when the disciples tell him about the priests that they see at an altar that exalt his name, he tells them that they are the disciples. It says the disciples see the temple and they discuss it. They said, we have seen a great house with a large altar in it, and 12 men. They are the priests, we would say, and a name, and a crowd of people is waiting at the altar until the priests, ellipses, and receive the offerings. But we kept waiting. Jesus said, what are the priests like? They said, some, ellipses, 2 weeks, some sacrifice their own children, others their wives, in praise and humility with each other. Some sleep with men, some are involved in slaughter, some commit a multitude of sins and deeds of lawlessness, and the men who stand before the altar invoke your name. And in all the deeds of their deficiency, the sacrifices are brought to completion. After they said this, they were quiet, for they were troubled. And Jesus offers an allegorical interpretation of the vision of the temple. He says, Jesus said to them, why are you troubled? Truly I say to you, all the priests who stand before this altar invoke my name. Again I say to you, my name has been written on this, ellipses, of the generations of the stars through the human generations, and they have planted trees without fruit in my name in a shameful manner. Jesus said to them, those you have seen receiving the offerings at the altar, that is who you are. That is the God you serve, and you are those 12 men you have seen. And so, it just talks about that's them. And so they're doing pious things. They're giving offerings to God, and he's scoffing at them. He's laughing at them. He's like, and they're just like, what are you talking about? We're doing what is proper. And he's like, yeah, but you're not doing this because of your own, because of your own will. You don't have a will. You don't have a will. This is the will of God. This is your God, because the astral self, becomes your God, if you will. You become super pious and righteous and devout, while your astral self, gets reaps the benefits of your imprisonment, of your enslavement. It's like I mentioned in other videos before, if you are, if you want something, if your astral self wants something, it will create a desire within your physical vehicle so it can have it on the astral realm. that's just how it goes. And so Jesus is like, you're the ones killing your wives and killing your kids, and whatever the case is, that's you. And so they became troubled, and they became very upset with him when he disclosed this information to them. But that's this aspect of them because of their restrictions, within physicality. And so Judas sells Jesus out at the end of this Gnostic text, the Gospel of Judas. And it talks about how the Kundalini pretty much has risen within Judas, because this is the earthly sacral aspect of who we are. What they call it, the Kundalini, I call it the earthly sacral because, I think it has, racial implications, if you will, like with coons. Like oftentimes they refer to people who have more melanin as a coon. I don't like that. They always put pretty names on things that, from their standpoint is something very derogatory and condescending. And so with my third eye, I can see right through it. But, because the New Age refers to it as the Kundalini, I just do that as well, just for a frame of reference for some people. But I know exactly what it means. But yeah, it talks about how Jesus is talking to Judas, as the 13th demon, as, a fucus, if you will, the 13th sign of the zodiac. This is a fucus. And if you go back to Nostradamus talks about the end of the world and how a fucus is the one who actually, it lies within the astrological alignment of a fucus, I believe. But anyway, it says already, Jesus is talking to Judas and saying to him, already your horn has been raised, your wrath has been kindled, your star has shone brightly, and your heart has. And so the text, there's a break in text right here. But you can see that the Kundalini has risen. And so the Kundalini, or the earthly sacral, one thing about it, when it's suppressed, it will come back in a very nasty, filthy, and disgusting way. And like I said, I've talked about this. I don't want to restrict the videos or what have you, so I'm not going to talk about, so much of my Kundalini and the disgusting, debased aspect of it, but it's very nasty. And to see my very nasty, racist, sexually deviant, what is it? It's very interesting. I really do assassinate my ego and my astral self in this book. And and I'm happy because it's not of my doing. This ego that I play, my avatar, is not of my doing. My astral unconscious self is not of my doing. It is my master's. And so I want him to wear the I want him to do the walk of shame, if you will, in this one. Because, this is not of my making. And, I don't really feel bad at all about exposing these aspects of my ego. And I really did try to, do some introspection to see what are some things I do want to cover up. There are a few more things, that I did want to cover up. I didn't want people to kind of know, wow, if someone knew that about me, I would feel, exposed or something like that. But, for the most part, I really tried to put everything in this book that I could find, any corners of my mind that I could find where, I didn't want to confess my sins, so to speak. But there's always something hiding. That's one thing about the id, or the Antichrist, or the mind. It always tries to cover up stuff. And so, anytime I felt a resistance to something, I tried to disclose it, put it in the book, the burn book, right? It's like in Mean Girls. So I've tried to put it in the book and let it out. You let it out, honey. Put it in the book. So I tried to put the different aspects of myself, like the burn book in Mean Girls, and just really, burn this ego, because, it's easy to fall victim to the ego, especially my ego, because my ego is very angelic. I'm all about saving, the earth and loving people and being a great mom and all these different things. But that was something that was given to me. And also this astral self, which is Kylo Ren. I call him my real astral self Kai-Ho. But, Kai-Ho, or Kylo Ren, I consider to be, that's not my doing. you know, this other aspect of me is because of the restrictions that I received from a master in the physical realm that caused and birthed this filthy, disgusting whore. So, you know, I want him to actually wear that shame, if you will, and not for me to wear it, you know, for good or bad, you know, for duality. I love being associated with being a great mom. That's one of the parts of my ego that it was very difficult for me to not have attachment with, because I love kids. I was groomed to love children, but that's not me. That's not essentially who I am. Essentially, I'm nothing. I'm no one. You know, I'm just an observer of duality. But because of the way that I was conditioned and groomed by a master, I found identification with my with the role that I play. And so, you know, I just wanted to expose, you know, this ego and this astral aspect of myself and Kylo Ren. Talk about the separation. Talk about the Trinity. I don't believe I mentioned Emily Rose in this chapter, but I do mention her in this video. She's mentioned in the book, and other places, because Emily Rose is a great example of what a devout, saintly person, what happens and how that can look like demonic possession, where you're, you know, just dominated by demons, if you will. And, you know, because we have karma, you know, or, you know, this is a computer, our mind's a computer. So because we have avatars we've played in other lifetimes, those avatars are still in our conscience. And so as a result, you, and during a demonic possession, like a lesion, if you will, where someone's overcome by demons, you can even have different languages, different time periods. You know, these demons are conscious, unlike the ego. So although I may not be conscious or whatever, in another lifetime, this other aspect of me is conscious. And so maybe it was Italian or something like that, so it starts speaking Italian, or whatever the case is, or it existed during the time of World War II, so it disguises itself as Hitler or Nero or whatever the case is. You know, the thing is that we are existing in various universes. It's like parallel universes. And so I know this is getting into a little bit you know, a little far-fetchedness, if you will. But you know, the mind, you know, is in various pockets of time, if you will. And so, you know, since the mind is in various pockets of time, it's still housed within the ego. And it's aware of the ego, but the ego is not aware of it. And that's purposely done, if you will, to create separation, if you will. That's why when you see in Assassin's Creed, when Cal, David, or what is his name, Michael Fassbender, when he obtains the mind of Eve, all of his avatars pop out. All of his avatars pop out. And, you know, they all come into consciousness. Because these are all parts of him from different lifetimes, parallel universes. He's existing. Cal is existing in different lifetimes. And all of his avatars come to meet him once he's able to obtain the mind of Eve. And so, you know, just let that be some food for thought when you think about, you know, possession, demonic possession, and how people are overcome with a legion of demons, because those demons haven't found, I guess what you would call, you know, expression. They haven't been exercised through the ego itself. And so, you know, I know if I were to be exercised, it would be very nasty and filthy and disgusting. But, you know, I just really want my story to be told. So, you know, this future self, if you will, can definitely, you know, just definitely know her divinity, because she won't have the melanin content with the third eye to actually, you know, understand, you know, what reality is all about. So, you know, like I said, heaven and hell will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And, you know, I may be buried under my unconscious, my unconscious mind, but the words will live on. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video.